Welcome back to Law and Crime, everybody. I'm Jesse Weber, and thanks for joining us. So we are continuing our recap of the Timothy Jones Jr. trial out of South Carolina. Where we last left off, the jury found him guilty across the board of murdering his children. Now, it wasn't that big of a surprise, considering the strong evidence put forward by the prosecution. But having said that, the defense did make some really strong points about the mental health aspect, talking about his history of mental health, the family history of mental health. And on top of the fact, you have to ask, why would a father murder his 5 children in cold blood? This is a question that we've seen before, and the jury always wanted an explanation. Now, they had an opportunity here to even find him guilty but mentally ill, which is something unique in South Carolina. It's basically saying, yes, he has a mental illness, but he's still guilty under the law. In other words, they're saying he could tell the difference between right and wrong, but he couldn't conform his behavior to the law. The jury didn't go that route. They found him guilty, 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 guilty. So now, this same jury that determined that, they now have to determine what will his punishment be, because this was a death penalty eligible case. Right now, we want to start with the prosecution's opening statement in the penalty phase. Okay, let's break this down and get some perspective. Joining me right now is former Philadelphia prosecutor Bernarda Villalona. Bernarda, great to have you here on Law&Crime.
Thank you for having me.
Of course, tough case, but you're joining us at an interesting time because we covered the trial phase, and the jury rejecting that option, guilty but mentally ill. It said to me, they're not buying this mental health defense. So if I'm the defense and I'm now going into this penalty phase, I'm thinking, what can I convince this jury of? What do you think?
Well, I think what the defense tried to do, and actually I think they did a great job with it, however they didn't succeed, is try to tear at the heartstrings of the jurors. They said, give him mercy. Well, not mercy for him, but mercy for the defendant's family, for his family, for the Jones family. Like specifically, the defense attorney was like, the family has already been through enough. How many more people do they have to bury? How many more funerals do they have to go to? Do it for the family, not for Timothy Jones, but for the family.
And that's an interesting point. I guess the other side of it is, if when you think about a death penalty eligible case, isn't this the one that comes to mind? Isn't it this type of case that really why we have the death penalty?
Absolutely. I think this is the key case that was made exactly for the death penalty. Because when you think about the horrendous acts that Timothy Jones did to his kids, to think that he used his own hands to take breath away from his young kids, and then even the 2 infants, when he couldn't grasp with his hands, he took a belt and sucked the life out of each of those infants without any remorse, and all the choices that he made in order to get there, I think this is a perfect case. Yeah,
you make a great point. And look, it is an uphill battle for the defense. So let's play you right now. You just heard the prosecution. What did the defense have to say during the penalty phase? Wow, it's not his fault what happened. What do you think about that?
It seems like every stage of the case, nothing is ever his fault. He never takes responsibility for any of his actions. Here we have him 3 months later after killing his 5 kids on a phone call with his father. And what does he say? If Amber would have been here, if Amber wasn't popping the guy next door, this wouldn't have happened. It's everyone's fault but himself. He never accepts responsibility. And that sentence right there where he says, well, if Amber would have been here, just goes to show you another reason why he killed his kids is really to get back at Amber, at his ex-wife, the anger he had towards her.
Do you think the defense raised some questions for you as you were listening to this trial about mental health that said, wait a minute, maybe he really was insane? Because did he give any signs that what he really thought he was doing was right? The defense was keen to say that he wanted to kill his kids because, or he thought it was the best thing for them, and that he never intended to kill Natan with this abuse. He thought the abuse was the right thing to do to discipline his children. Did that ever raise a question for you?
So it did at one point. However, when the officer testified that when he was in the car, Timothy Jones, he said, oh God, oh Lord, forgive me. If he believed what he was doing was wrong, why are you asking for forgiveness? I mean, if he believed what he did was right, he was doing it in the name of God, why are you asking for forgiveness from God?
That's a good point. I mean, the classic law school example of where you want somebody to have the insanity defense would work if somebody kills somebody and then they just go around drinking lemonade and cutting the grass as if nothing happens. The police come and they say, oh, what's wrong? What happened? Because that's somebody who really didn't understand. Here, there seemed to be more questions and the jury obviously didn't believe that. When we talk about the abuse, that's where we're going to focus right now, the abuse of Natan that ultimately led to the deaths of all of these children. Because one of the things that we heard was from Jonathan Stone, who's Natan Jones' kindergarten teacher. I remember this testimony when we watched it. It was difficult and it had an impact on me. I'm sure it had an impact on the jury. Watch. So here you have somebody that knew Natan so well, he actually had to leave school because of the traumatic impact that this had on him. And you know, when you watch these cases, especially with the young children, the people that are around these children, the impact that it has on them, it's just so palpable. And I'm curious, if I was sitting on that jury, what I would be thinking. If you were sitting on that jury, what would you be thinking?
I would be distraught. And distraught, especially when you're hearing the testimony from a teacher, where our teachers spend more time with our kids than actually we do, and actually get to know them and embrace them as if they were their own. Yeah,
and it's one thing to say, oh, you know, you read the facts of a case, and you have a father who was accused of killing his 5 children. It's a horrific headline. But just to hear the impact and the words from people that knew him so well, and the level of abuse as well, that there was something that was going on. A lot of people followed this case and were so concerned, just couldn't make sense of the fact that why did this man have custody of his children? And really, was it just because he was able to provide the support that they needed, the financial support? Do you think that there was a mistake here about how did they wind up in his custody? How did they wind up in his care? Could this have been prevented? Could it have been prevented?
Well, one thing is that the therapist that Timothy Jones was seeing, probably I think like 2 years prior, was the one who wrote a recommendation saying that Timothy Jones is best suited to have primary custody of the kids. And I think that had an impact as to why he had custody. Aside from he was the sole breadwinner, he was making $80,000 working at this computer place at Intel, while his wife Amber wasn't working, didn't even have a high school education, had no stability. So in the end, it was because the father had stability, was working, had a home, and had this reference from a therapist who said, he should be the one that should be granted custody.
Yeah, but at the same time, the defense keeps saying, you know, this is a guy that was suffering from mental illness for a long time, have a history of it, the family had a history of it. How does this end up happening?
The reality is that the defense is saying that, but where's it documented? And I think that's what the jury took into account in making their determination of finding him guilty. Where's documentation of him having a mental health issue? He saw a therapist, and the therapist said that she never saw any kind of schizophrenia signs from Timothy Jones. So if you have a therapist saying that, and you have no history that is documented from the past, and all of a sudden now you're saying he has schizophrenia, we're going to look at it as something that you just made up now. I understand, yes, your mother had it, but the reality is that we have a lot of people out there with their parents that have mental health issues, and it's 80% of them do not develop mental health issues as a result of what a parent has.
And you could even have schizophrenia, but not rise to the level of insanity.
That's correct.
That's the thing.
Correct.
So people, just because you hear these words and you hear these terms and these diagnoses, doesn't necessarily mean it's going to automatically be the insanity defense. Clearly what we saw here. When we come back, though, we're going to hear the testimony from Dr. Donna Maddox, who's a forensic psychiatrist. And if you missed that testimony, it was important to watch. We'll be right back.